God will lead you. Life, with all its vibrant colors and harsh challenges, can sometimes push us into the dark corners of our souls. There are moments when each of us feels trapped in a whirlwind of failure, criticism, and a sense of inadequacy. These emotional wounds, whether subtle or profound, can gradually erode our self-esteem, causing us to doubt our own worth. The confidence in ourselves, once a flame warming our hearts, now seems like mere embers fading in a cold wind. When failures repeat, each stumble feels like a knife cutting into our belief. A job that doesn't succeed, a relationship that falls apart, or relentless criticism from others can make us feel unworthy, incapable of moving forward. Despair begins to creep in, like a thick fog obscuring all hope. There are days when we just want to give up, to surrender everything, and let the current of life sweep us away without the strength to resist. In those moments, the world seems cloaked in gray, and our hearts are heavy with the question, is there a way out for me? But in the deepest darkness, there is always a ray of light. This is not a human light, not self-reliance or fleeting worldly encouragement. It is the divine light, the light of God, who always extends open arms, ready to guide lost souls. Following God is not merely a spiritual journey, but a path that leads us out of the darkness of despair to a new horizon, a radiant horizon, where the soul is healed and the spirit strengthened. When we are submerged in discouragement, when every door seems closed, God remains there, a steadfast lighthouse in the storm. The Bible, with its timeless wisdom, points to the radiant path God has prepared for those who seek Him. A powerful passage in Isaiah 40:31 declares, "But they who wait for the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint." This is not just a promise, but an unchanging truth. When we place our trust in God, God grants us the strength to transcend our limitations, to rise from failures, and to walk the path God has laid out. Following God does not mean fleeing from life's difficulties, but learning to face them with a steadfast spirit and a heart full of hope. God does not promise a smooth path, but God promises to walk with us, guiding each step. In moments when we feel inadequate, God reminds us that true strength comes not from ourselves, but from God, the one who created all things and knows every corner of our souls. The journey of following God is one of discovering light. It is the light of truth, the light of unconditional love, and the light of hope that never fades. When we choose to walk God's path, we are no longer alone. Every step, whether small or unsteady, is guided by God. God is the teacher, the friend, and the Father, always ready to lift us when we stumble and show the way when we are lost. Losing faith in ourselves is not the end, but an opportunity to realize that human strength is limited, while God's strength is boundless. When we feel inadequate, when others' criticism makes us doubt ourselves, God invites us to look to Him. God does not judge us by our failures or mistakes, but sees the potential we may have forgotten. Following God is a path of healing. In moments of despair, when we want to give up everything, God gently reminds us that we were created with a purpose. Each of us is part of God's grand plan. No matter how small or insignificant we feel, God sees infinite value in every soul. God does not require us to be perfect, but only to open our hearts and follow His light. God's path is radiant, not only because it leads us out of darkness, but because it helps us rediscover ourselves. When we follow God, we learn to see ourselves through God's lens, not as flawed beings, but as cherished creations endowed with the strength to overcome any challenge. Our spirit, once crushed by failures, is now uplifted by God's presence. Our psyche, once torn by discouragement, finds peace in God's divine guidance. Following God is not just about regaining self-confidence, but building an unyielding spirit. When we choose to walk with God, we are no longer bound by the limitations of the world. Criticism, failures, or feelings of inadequacy no longer form walls that block our way. Instead, they become lessons, opportunities to draw closer to God and realize that God always has a better path for us. God's path is one of hope. It is a path where every step is illuminated by divine light, where every challenge carries profound meaning. When we follow God, we learn to let go of despair and embrace trust in God's plan. Though life may bring storms, God is the steadfast refuge, the light that never fades, guiding us through every difficulty. Following God not only helps us overcome dark moments, but brings a renewed spirit and a heart full of vitality. We are no longer imprisoned by discouragement or failure. Instead, we are set free to live a meaningful life, with the faith that each day is an opportunity to draw closer to God's light. When the soul is crushed by repeated failures, one of the most haunting questions arises. What am I living for? The sense of being lost, as if life is merely a series of meaningless days, can plunge us deeper into despair. But in these moments, when we feel trapped in a labyrinth with no exit, God invites us to step onto His path, a radiant path, where every step holds meaning and every moment is shaped by divine purpose. Following God is not merely about seeking comfort in times of trouble, but a journey of discovering the profound purpose God has placed in each life. Every one of us is created with a unique intention, a distinct role in God's grand tapestry. When we choose to follow God, we begin to see signs of that purpose, whether subtle or clear. A timely word of encouragement to another, a kind act from the heart, or a courageous decision to run after failure, all are pieces of God's plan. God's path is one of discovery. God does not leave us groping in the dark, but guides us with the light of truth. When we place our trust in God, God helps us realize that past failures do not define us, but are lessons preparing us for a brighter future. The sense of inadequacy that once held us back is replaced by the confidence that God has equipped us with everything needed to fulfill our mission. This journey does not require us to have all the answers immediately. Sometimes, following God means stepping forward in faith, trusting that each step is part of the path God has laid out. In this trust, we find the strength to overcome discouragement and move forward with a heart full of hope and a spirit fortified by God's presence. One of the most wondrous aspects of following God is how God transforms our psyche and spirit. Those who have felt despair, who have wanted to give up everything, will discover that God's path offers unmatched strength. Unlike the temporary solutions of the world, God's divine guidance touches the depths of the soul, healing invisible wounds and building a solid foundation for the spirit. When we follow God, we learn to release the burdens weighing down our hearts. The criticisms from others, once like arrows piercing our self-esteem, lose their power when we see ourselves through God's eyes. God does not view us as failures, but as beloved and chosen children. God's guidance helps us rebuild confidence, not based on external achievements, but on the truth that we are part of God's grand plan. God's radiant path not only helps us overcome spiritual challenges, but teaches us to face them with resilience. When confronted with difficulties, we are no longer swept into a spiral of self-doubt. Instead, we learn to rely on God's strength. God grants us the courage to rise, the patience to wait, and the wisdom to make sound decisions. Each challenge becomes an opportunity to grow, to strengthen our spirit, and to draw closer to God's light. Another powerful scripture in Philippians 4:13 affirms the strength God provides. I can do all things through Him who strengthens me. This reminds us that, when following God, no challenge is too great, no obstacle insurmountable. God's strength flows through us, enabling us to stand firm against the winds of doubt and walk forward on the radiant path God has prepared. Following God is not only about finding purpose or strength, but also a journey of discovering deep peace in the soul. In a turbulent world where pressures and failures can shake the spirit, God offers peace that surpasses all understanding. This is a peace that does not depend on external circumstances, but comes from trusting that God is guiding us through every trial. When we feel like giving up, when our minds are besieged by negative thoughts, God's path is where we find resilience. God not only guides us through the storms, but teaches us how to stand firm within them. Each step with God is a reminder that we do not need to be perfect or bear every burden alone. Instead, we can entrust our worries to God and trust that God will lead us to a brighter future. This resilience does not come from our own strength, but from God's presence in our lives. When we follow God, we learn to see each day as a new opportunity to live in God's light. Past failures cease to be painful scars and become milestones marking our journey of growth. The criticisms of others lose their power to shake our faith, for we know our worth is defined by God, not by the world. God's path is one of peace, where the soul finds rest and the spirit is uplifted. Though life may bring harsh challenges, we can walk with confidence, knowing that God is by our side, guiding each step on His radiant path. When feelings of failure and self-doubt weigh heavily, we often view ourselves as lesser, unchangeable versions of who we could be. But when we walk God's path, we are invited into a journey of self-renewal, not through our own efforts, but through God's divine guidance. This path is not merely an escape from the darkness of discouragement, but an opportunity to discover a stronger, more resilient version of ourselves, shaped by God's light. Following God is a journey of rediscovering the inherent worth God has placed in each of us. The failures that once made us feel worthless are now seen through a new lens, as stepping stones to growth. The criticisms that once wounded our self-esteem fade when we realize God created us with a unique purpose. God does not see us through our mistakes, but through the potential planted in our souls. This journey of renewal begins with accepting that we do not need to carry every burden alone. When we follow God, we learn to entrust our worries and fears to Him. God guides us step by step, helping us rebuild confidence by relying on His wisdom and strength. Each day on this path is an opportunity to discover new possibilities, qualities within ourselves we may not have recognized. For example, someone who believed they were incapable of leadership may find the courage to rise and inspire others when they trust God is with them. Someone haunted by past mistakes may learn to see them as valuable lessons, enabling wiser decisions for the future. God's path is radiant, where each step brings renewal, helping us become the best version of ourselves. One of the greatest gifts of following God is spiritual freedom. When trapped in a cycle of despair, our minds are often imprisoned by negative thoughts, repetitive questions about our worth, fears about the future, or regrets about the past. But when we choose to walk God's path, God breaks these invisible chains, granting us the freedom to live a full and meaningful life. This spiritual freedom does not come from denying difficulties, but from learning to face them with a new mindset. God teaches us that we need not be defined by our failures or the opinions of others. Instead, we are shaped by God's love and plan. When we follow God, we learn to release mental burdens, such as comparing ourselves to others or obsessing over perfection. Instead, we find joy in living true to the purpose God has set for us. The Bible in John 8:36 affirms the power of this freedom. So, if the Son sets you free, you will be free indeed. This reminds us that true freedom is found only by following God. God liberates us from the chains of self-doubt, enabling us to walk with a light spirit and a heart full of hope. God's radiant path is where we find the freedom to live authentically, unbound by worldly pressures. This freedom also brings clarity of mind. When we are no longer consumed by failures or criticism, we can focus on what truly matters. The goals God has set, the relationships God guides us to build, and the opportunities God opens. Following God not only helps us escape darkness, but unveils a new horizon, where the soul soars freely like an eagle, unburdened by the limitations of the past. Following God is not a solitary journey. One of the ways God guides us is through the people around us, friends, family, or the community of believers, who become sources of encouragement and support. When we feel a loss of confidence in ourselves, when despair makes us want to give up, God often places in our lives those who carry His light, helping us continue on His radiant path. The community of believers serves as a shining lamp, reminding us that we are not alone in our trials. A word of encouragement from a friend, a story of how someone overcame difficulties through God's guidance, or a moment of heartfelt sharing can become an unexpected source of strength. These relationships not only help us stand firm, but also reinforce our faith that God's path is the right one, where we find support and love. Moreover, when we follow God, God encourages us to become a light for others. Though we may feel inadequate, God uses our experiences and stories to inspire. Someone who has overcome despair through God's guidance can become a beacon of hope for others struggling with similar challenges. God's path is one of connection, where each of us plays a role in uplifting and encouraging one another. This companionship not only provides spiritual strength, but also helps us maintain resilience on the journey. When we share our trials and joys with those walking God's path alongside us, we realize that this journey is not just about ourselves, but about being part of something greater. A community guided by divine light, moving forward together with faith and hope. Following God is a journey that requires patience, especially when we face times when loss of confidence in ourselves seems insurmountable. In moments when feelings of failure and despair arise, God teaches us that His radiant path does not always lead to immediate results, but is a long journey where each step is fortified by faith and perseverance. Patience, nurtured through God's guidance, becomes a source of strength that helps us stand firm against challenges and continue moving forward. Patience on God's path is not merely about waiting, but about trusting that God is working in our lives, even when we do not see immediate results. When criticisms from others or repeated failures make us want to give up, God reminds us that He has a greater plan, far beyond what we can imagine. By following God, we learn to walk slowly but surely, with faith that each challenge is part of the journey, leading us to His light. Consider the story of Emma, a graphic designer in London who felt crushed by constant criticism from clients. Each rejected project made Emma doubt her talent, and she began to think she was unfit for the industry. In a moment of despair, Emma turned to God, reading a verse from Galatians 6:9. And let us not grow weary of doing good, for in due season we will reap, if we do not give up. This verse became a source of motivation for Emma to persevere. Instead of giving up, she spent time improving her skills, seeking constructive feedback, and trusting that God was guiding her through the difficulties. Gradually, Emma's projects gained recognition, but more importantly, she found new confidence, not based on others' approval, but on faith that God was leading her every step. Another example is Jacob, a teacher in New York, who felt exhausted by work pressures and unrealistic expectations from parents. Jacob often felt inadequate to inspire his students, and despair made him consider quitting teaching. But Jacob chose to follow God by spending each evening in prayer, asking for patience and wisdom. He also began journaling, recording small moments when he made a difference for his students. Over time, Jacob realized that his efforts, however small, were transforming his students' lives. God's path taught him that patience is not just waiting, but continuing to act with faith, that every effort has meaning in God's plan. Patience, guided by God, becomes a powerful tool for building a steadfast spirit. God's radiant path is where we learn not to rush or give up, but to trust that each step brings us closer to the purpose God has ordained. One of the ways God leads us on His radiant path is through the relationships He places in our lives. When we feel a loss of confidence in ourselves, meaningful relationships can become sources of encouragement, helping us recognize our worth and keep moving forward. Following God is not just a personal journey, but one of connection with others, where we learn to love, support, and walk together toward the light. God often uses relationships to remind us that we are not alone. A listening friend, a family member offering advice, or a stranger's kind gesture can become rays of light in dark days. When we follow God, God teaches us how to build and maintain these relationships, not based on competition or comparison, but on love and companionship. For example, Sophia, a student in Sydney, felt isolated after moving to a new city for university. Loneliness and academic pressure made her doubt her abilities, and she often considered giving up. But one day, Sophia joined a Bible study group at her school, where she met new friends. They not only shared her faith in God, but became sources of encouragement, helping her through tough times. One friend, Anna, regularly texted to check in and shared uplifting Bible verses. Through these relationships, Sophia realized that God was using those around her to guide her, helping her regain confidence and build a meaningful new life. Another case is Michael, an entrepreneur in Toronto who felt defeated after his startup collapsed. Criticism from business partners made Michael believe he was incapable of starting over. But Michael chose to follow God by seeking a community of like-minded believers. He joined a group of Christian entrepreneurs where people shared experiences and encouraged one another. Through these conversations, Michael learned to view failure as part of the journey, and he began rebuilding his career with faith that God was opening new opportunities. These relationships not only helped Michael overcome despair, but showed him that God's path always leads to connection and hope. Meaningful relationships, built through God's guidance, are milestones on His radiant path. They remind us that no matter how difficult life becomes, God places people in our lives to help us keep walking with a strong spirit and a heart full of hope. One of the most powerful ways to strengthen our spirit and psyche on God's path is by living with gratitude. When facing a loss of confidence or despair, gratitude can become a new lens, helping us see light even in the darkest moments. Following God teaches us that every day brings small gifts, and recognizing them can transform how we approach life. Gratitude is not merely feeling content with what we have, but a conscious choice to focus on the good things God brings. Whether it's a beautiful sunny day, a stranger's smile, or the strength to get through a tough day, these moments are evidence of God's presence in our lives. Consider Olivia, a nurse in Chicago who felt exhausted by long shifts and hospital pressures. She often felt inadequate to meet her patients' needs, and fatigue made her want to quit. But Olivia chose to follow God by starting each day with a gratitude list, writing down 3 things she appreciated, however small. One day, it might be a recovering patient's smile. Another, a colleague's support. Over time, Olivia realized that gratitude changed how she viewed her work. Instead of focusing on difficulties, she began to see her job as part of God's plan, helping her rediscover joy and resilience. God's radiant path is where gratitude becomes a source of strength. When we learn to appreciate the small things, we not only overcome despair, but build a positive spirit, ready to embrace the new opportunities God brings. Psychological wounds, whether from repeated failures, harsh criticism, or feelings of inadequacy, can leave invisible scars on the soul. These wounds not only erode self-esteem, but trap us in a cycle of self-doubt and despair. When the soul is wounded, the world seems bleak, and each day feels like a battle to find meaning and hope. But in these dark moments, God's radiant path opens, inviting us into a journey of healing where the soul is renewed and the spirit strengthened. Psychological wounds often stem from experiences that make us feel unworthy. A careless word, a failure at work, or comparison with others can etch negative messages into our minds that we are not good enough, not strong enough, or not deserving. Left unaddressed, these messages become walls separating us from joy and confidence. But when we choose to follow God, God not only breaks down these walls, but guides us through a journey of healing, where each wound is treated with His divine light. God's path is one of healing because God understands every corner of our souls. God does not see our wounds as signs of failure, but as opportunities for divine intervention, bringing renewal. When we walk with God, God gently removes the layers of pain, replacing them with the truth of our worth in His eyes. Following God is not about denying our wounds, but learning to place them in His hands, trusting that God can transform pain into strength. This journey of healing begins with accepting that we do not need to carry our wounds alone. God invites us to draw near, to let Him be our refuge, where we can rest and find peace. In Psalm 147:3, the Bible affirms, He heals the brokenhearted and binds up their wounds. This is a promise that God not only sees our psychological wounds, but actively heals them. When we follow God, we find a strength beyond understanding, enabling us to face the scars of the past and step into a radiant future. Psychological wounds often distort how we perceive ourselves and the world around us. A wounded mind may be consumed by negative thoughts, such as feelings of unworthiness or an inability to change. These thoughts, if left unchecked, can lead to prolonged despair, making us want to give up entirely. But God's path offers an opportunity to reshape our psyche, helping us rebuild a positive mindset guided by divine light. Following God is a process of restructuring how we think. God teaches us to replace negative thoughts with truths from His Word. When we feel inadequate, God reminds us that He has equipped us with everything needed to fulfill our purpose. When we are hurt by criticism, God affirms that our worth lies not in others' opinions, but in His unconditional love. This radiant path not only heals old wounds, but builds a solid psychological foundation, where confidence and hope can flourish. A crucial part of this journey is learning to release psychological burdens. Wounds from the past, such as a major failure or a broken relationship, can become anchors dragging us down. But when we follow God, He teaches us to entrust those burdens to Him. This does not mean forgetting what happened, but learning to view them through God's lens as lessons, opportunities for growth, and stepping stones bringing us closer to His plan. This process of reshaping our psyche requires trust in God's guidance. Each day, as we choose to walk His path, we gradually transform our thinking. Negative thoughts that once dominated our minds give way to optimism and faith. We are no longer trapped in a cycle of self-doubt, but walk with confidence that God is working within us, making us stronger each day. One of the greatest consequences of psychological wounds is the loss of joy. When the soul is crushed by failure or feelings of inadequacy, life seems to lose its color, and each day becomes a heavy burden. But God's radiant path leads us back to joy, not the fleeting joy of the world, but a deep, lasting joy rooted in His presence. Following God helps us rediscover joy by changing how we view life. Psychological wounds often cause us to focus on shortcomings and failures, but God invites us to look to Him, where everything is set in proper order. God teaches us that joy does not depend on external circumstances, but comes from knowing we are loved and guided by Him. As we walk God's path, we begin to see that each day brings new opportunities to experience His goodness. God's healing journey not only restores the soul, but rekindles a sense of wonder about life. Things once obscured by despair, the beauty of a peaceful morning, the happiness of simple moments, or the satisfaction of completing a small task, become clearer as we follow God. This path helps us rediscover joy in the small things, building a positive psyche ready to embrace the good things God brings. God not only heals psychological wounds, but grants us a new heart, full of hope and vitality. In John 16:22, the Bible states, "So also you have sorrow now, but I will see you again, and your hearts will rejoice, and no one will take your joy from you." This affirms that the joy God brings is eternal, untouchable by worldly difficulties. When we follow God, we find a source of joy that does not depend on circumstances, but is anchored in His divine guidance. God's radiant path is one of healing, where the soul is renewed, the psyche reshaped, and joy restored. Each step with God is a step out of the darkness of wounds, toward a radiant horizon where the spirit is uplifted and the soul finds peace. Psychological wounds, especially when persistent, can make the soul fragile, like a dry leaf easily broken by the wind. Repeated failures, relentless criticism, or feelings of inadequacy can create a sense of helplessness, making us doubt our ability to move forward. But God's radiant path is where we find the strength to build spiritual resilience, a shield protecting the soul from life's storms. Spiritual resilience does not mean becoming numb to wounds, but learning to stand firm and recover more quickly after each blow. Following God provides a solid foundation for this resilience, for God not only comforts us in times of suffering, but also grants us the strength to face new challenges. As we walk on God's path, we realize that wounds are not the end, but opportunities for God to work within us, making us stronger. A vital part of this journey is learning to rely on God's guidance to reshape our responses to wounds. Instead of letting criticism or failure define our worth, we learn to trust in God's truth, that we are created with a purpose, and no wound can shake God's plan. This radiant path helps us build an unyielding spirit, where each wound becomes a brick, contributing to a more resilient soul. The Bible in Romans 5:3-4 affirms the value of resilience through trials. We rejoice in our sufferings, knowing that suffering produces endurance, and endurance produces character, and character produces hope. This reminds us that psychological wounds, though painful, are not meaningless when we follow God. God uses these difficulties to refine us, helping us develop a strong spirit, ready to face any challenge. God's path is where we learn to transform wounds into strength, not through our own efforts, but through His divine guidance. The journey of building resilience requires us to continually turn to God, seeking His comfort and guidance. Each time a new wound arises, we are invited to step deeper into God's path, where the soul is protected and the spirit strengthened. This resilience not only helps us overcome current wounds, but prepares us for future challenges, with the faith that God is always by our side, guiding us through every difficulty. Psychological wounds are not merely immediate injuries, but can have lasting effects, making us prone to self-doubt or despair. To maintain long-term mental health, we need a sustainable source of strength that surpasses the world's temporary solutions. God's radiant path is that source, providing a firm foundation to protect our souls and sustain a healthy spirit amidst life's upheavals. Following God helps us build mental health by anchoring our minds in His unchanging truth. When negative thoughts, such as feelings of inadequacy or fear of failure, try to dominate our minds, God invites us to focus on His Word. The promises in the Bible become a lamp illuminating our path, helping us reorient our thoughts and emotions. By regularly reflecting on God's guidance, we create a mental habit where old wounds no longer have the power to control our lives. A key aspect of maintaining mental health is learning to recognize and manage triggers of harm. When we follow God, He grants us the wisdom to identify factors that can damage the soul, such as toxic environments, negative relationships, or unnecessary pressures. God not only helps us avoid these, but guides us toward healthier paths, where the psyche is nurtured and the spirit uplifted. Moreover, God's path encourages us to develop a proactive mindset in caring for our mental health. This may involve taking time to rest, reflect, or seek peace in God's presence. When we place our trust in God, we learn to prioritize the health of our soul, not allowing wounds to accumulate, but instead entrusting them to Him. This path not only helps us heal current wounds, but equips us with the ability to face future challenges without collapsing. God's guidance is an inexhaustible source of strength, enabling us to maintain mental health throughout life. As we walk on God's radiant path, we not only overcome wounds, but build a resilient soul, ready to embrace whatever life brings. Despair is one of the most devastating states of the soul, where all light seems extinguished and life's meaning fades. When we suffer psychological wounds, despair can creep in, making us feel there is no reason to go on. But God's radiant path is where despair is transformed into hope, where the soul is ignited by His divine light. Following God is a journey of changing how we view difficulties. Instead of letting despair dominate, we are invited to look to God, the one who brings hope even in the darkest moments. God does not promise that all problems will vanish, but God promises to walk with us, guiding us through the deepest valleys of the soul. When we place our trust in God, we begin to realize that psychological wounds, though painful, are not the final word. Instead, they are turning points, leading us to a new horizon where hope is rekindled and the soul is renewed. God's path helps us shift from despair to hope by redirecting the focus of our minds. Instead of dwelling on failures or criticism, we learn to focus on God's plan. Each wound, each failure becomes part of a larger story God is writing for our lives. God teaches us that hope is not expecting everything to be perfect, but trusting that God is working in every circumstance, leading us to a better future. The Bible in Jeremiah 29:11 offers a powerful affirmation of hope. "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans for welfare and not for evil, to give you a future and a hope." This reminds us that God's path always leads to hope, even when we cannot see the way ahead. When we follow God, we find the strength to let go of despair, embracing instead a lasting hope anchored in His guidance. This transformation does not happen overnight, but each step on God's path is a step out of darkness. God gently guides us, helping us replace despairing thoughts with new perspectives, where the soul is healed and the spirit uplifted. God's radiant path is where we find hope, not just to survive wounds, but to truly live a life full of meaning and vitality.